Drug makers don't usually do Super Bowl commercials. In fact, in the last decade, only a small handful of pharma ads have run during the big game. But even despite a recent FDA crackdown on TV drug advertising, this year is going to be different. Find out how in this week's Status Report. On Sunday, the New England Patriots are playing the Seattle Seahawks in the Super Bowl. I'm from Boston, so unlike this guy, I'll be rooting for the Pats. But even if you're like Tom Brady and don't have a dog in this fight, or maybe you're the type to say sports ball unironically, there's always the commercials. The NFL Championship is the highest rated TV broadcast of the year after year, and it commands famously eye-watering ad rates. And if there is one industry that can afford the exorbitant cost of running a Super Bowl ad, it's the trillion-dollar drug industry. But drug makers typically don't shell out for the big game. And it has nothing to do with football. Regular season NFL games are chock full of pharma ads. But the Super Bowl is another animal entirely. Stat looked into the reasons why a while back, and according to industry experts, it's a combination of demographics, the aforementioned cost, and the extra scrutiny that comes with being on the biggest television stage. Drug companies historically just haven't considered it worth it. But this year, we already know that there are going to be a bunch of ads that are trying to sell drugs one way or another. We know this because a lot of them have already been released. Which I don't really understand. Don't some people watch the Super Bowl just for the commercials? Seems like a spoiler to me. But anyway, right now, you can watch Novartis' Super Bowl ad, a teaser for a Novo Nordisk spot, and commercials from telehealth companies Ro and Hims & Hers. There's also an ad for Boehringer Ingelheim's screening test for UACR, which is an indicator of early kidney damage, featuring Sofia Vergara and Octavia Spencer. And who knows, there may be some surprises too. But all these ads have something in common. They are selling drugs, but in a bit of a roundabout way. Boehringer Ingelheim, for example, developed the type 2 diabetes medication Jardiance with drug maker Eli Lilly. Their Super Bowl ad isn't explicitly for Jardiance, but the test they are advertising could yield a result that just might lead to a prescription for Jardiance. And telehealth companies Ro and Hims & Hers fall into a bit of a gray area. They aren't traditional drug companies, and they have their own ways of skirting, if not the letter of the law, certainly the spirit of the laws governing drug advertising. Earlier, I had a great chat with stat reporter at large, Damian Garde, about these ads, the recent FDA crackdown, and more. But first, if you're enjoying this video so far, please like and subscribe. It's a little click, but it actually helps us out a lot. And Status Report is now on Instagram. You can find us there at Status Report IG. All right, Damian, welcome back to Status Report, and what's up?
How you doing? A simpler time.
Simpler time. So this year, there's been a little bit of a crackdown on pharmaceutical ads. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so the new FDA under the Trump administration, led by Commissioner Marty Makary, came in with many mandates, but one of which was to rein in pharmaceutical advertising, which both Makary and his boss, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the HHS secretary, have blamed for all manners of things in our culture. And in the fall, we saw that crackdown come to fruition, at least in the form of more than 100 warning letters that the FDA sent out to drug companies, dinging them for many perceived infractions of federal regulations in their ads. Now, some of them were pretty predictable things of like you didn't adequately disclose the number of side effects that you're required to, but others were really adhering to the letter of the law in a way that I wouldn't call pedantic, but I think it was surprising how much the FDA was being sticklers about this. This included, there were a few where they basically said, you cast actors who look too healthy for a commercial about ostensibly sick people. There was another that chided a company for saying, these people seem they're enjoying themselves too much when they purportedly have cancer or autoimmune disease, or there were too many quick cuts. The commercial was too enjoyable, which made it hard to focus on the litany of side effects that are listed at the end of it. So this was interesting. Now, most of these letters were basically like the company had to respond within 15 days. It wasn't like we're going to, fine you or yank your ads off of the airwaves, but it was at least an interesting kind of like shot across the bow of like, there's a new sheriff in town at the FDA, and we're not going to put up with some of the stuff that might have flown in the past.
But Novartis is running an ad at the Super Bowl this year, but it's not like a typical pharmaceutical ad. What are they doing with this ad that's a little bit different?
Yeah, it's interesting. So they're doing what's called a disease awareness ad, which is where basically you run an advertisement describing a disease that you happen to have a treatment for, but you don't disclose that fact and the name of the treatment that you are selling for this disease. And that basically, I don't want to say skirts, but different rules apply to that. So you don't have to jump through the hoops of listing all the side effects and adhering to the relatively stringent laws that regulate those ads. So in Novartis' case, the ad is for prostate cancer. They, of course, market a drug called Pluvicto to treat that. That goes unmentioned in the ad. Instead, it's about prostate cancer screening, which can be done through a blood test. The Novartis ad, it's walking a delicate line in a bunch of ways. I mean, the pun of tight ends is obvious, is clever, whatever. But what they're playing on is the audience's imagined aversion to the digital rectal exam. So there's all sorts of like finger.
And digital as in like...
As in a digit and a rectum and an exam. And so there's all sorts of kind of like finger imagery, like even the first sequence, the Rams tight end Colby Parkinson kind of delicately dips his finger into the pool, which I thought was kind of odd. And you can imagine the various focus groups and teams that went through this of like, how much of a toe can we put on the line, but still get our message across in a way that is winking and charming and not trivializing a serious disease while also not making anyone too mad. I guess they succeeded. I guess we'll find out.
But the Super Bowl isn't for a few days. Why do you think we're already seeing the commercials? It seems kind of odd. I feel like people used to like watch the Super Bowl for the commercials, and it's kind of like a spoiler.
There used to be a desire, or like a pent-up desire among some people to watch the Super Bowl for the commercials. And then there would be teasers. I remember as a kid, like on Good Morning America, there'd be like a glimpse of what the Clydesdales are up to this year at the Super Bowl. And now fully companies are just putting their ads on YouTube days before the Super Bowl. I assume that's because, and we're proving them correct, that when they do that, they can count on some initial public reaction to the ad during the week, and then some bolstered public reaction when many people see it during the actual game, and then maybe some discussion on Monday morning. So theoretically, you can imagine if you're like a media consultant for these companies, you can say, well, you can get multiple bites at the apple of getting your ad seen if you just put it on YouTube 5 days before.
But Novartis isn't the only company we cover that is going to be running an ad this weekend at the Super Bowl. Also, Hims & Hers and Ro, these telehealth companies, are advertising pharmaceutical drugs, but they don't really have to worry about this crackdown. Is that right?
Yeah, it's fascinating. So these telehealth firms exist kind of in a gray area of those FDA rules I described because they exist basically as intermediaries between the patient who wants a medicine, the manufacturer who provides it. And as a result, when they advertise, even if they say, as both of these ads do, GLP-1 weight loss medicine, because they don't name one, they are not encumbered with listing off those side effects and following some other rules that apply to this. I think Hims is maybe the most fascinating example. They made headlines a year ago. They had an ad that struck a curiously populist tone using the song This Is America.
Obesity is America's deadliest epidemic.
This is America.
74% of us are overweight, and obesity leads to 500,000 deaths each year.
To kind of make the implicit, if not totally explicit case, that basically like pharma's ripping you off, and we Hims are the Robin Hoods of health who will ameliorate the inequities of society. This year's ad goes arguably one step further, although tonally maybe one step dialing it back, which is to say we hear the warm voiceover tones of rapper and actor Common, and we see visuals that I feel like are just cribbed enough from the intro to the TV show Succession such that their lawyers were comfortable with it. Anyway, what they lay out is basically this true thing, which is that wealthy people have greater access to healthcare resources than people who are not wealthy in this country and all over the world. But what they pin their pitch on basically is that Hims will allow you to bridge that gap. You, the regular non-wealthy person, by virtue of having access to Hims services, can get the sort of concierge medicine that the guy who owns the company that owns your company that owns your company has access to, which is interesting. You can imagine people kind of balking at the notion that a publicly traded company is like storming the Bastille to seize the means of health for the proletariat. But also, I went to Hims' website to kind of look at their pricing, and the lab test services that they describe in this ad are $350. They start at that level. The compounded GLP-1 medicines, which that's already a legal gray area, but even then, those start at about $200 a month. The testosterone hormone therapy they describe starts at like $99 a month. And the cancer early detection test, at least retail from the company that makes it, is about $1,000. And so you add all this up, and I do wonder, I'm not adjudicating the ads and I'm not a regulator, but a reasonable person could look at the sum amount of money that Hims would charge you for the services described and say, like, is the person who can afford that not rich by some definition? But, again, that's for someone else to decide.
In the other company, the other telehealth company that is putting on a big ad with Serena Williams, or has put out an ad with Serena Williams, I guess they try to portray themselves as a little bit more on the up and up than, say, Hims or Hers or many of other telehealth companies. How do they position themselves that way?
Yeah, so you're talking about Ro, which is a company that is in the same business as Hims and Hers and others, but as you mentioned, has, at least compared to Hims, not run afoul of the pharmaceutical industry and regulators as frequently. So Ro also offers GLP-1 medicines. They lean less into the compounded medicines, which, as I mentioned before, are on kind of shaky legal ground, but rather point you toward the FDA-approved ones made by Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk. What's interesting about Ro's ad is that, as you mentioned, it features Serena Williams, who is one of the most famous people in the world, but she's famous because she's one of the greatest athletes in history, which is, reliant upon one's body. And here she is telling us that despite all of the athletic prowess that we know very well from watching her on TV for the last 2.5 decades, she decided to take a GLP-1 medicine. And her partnership with the company is now a few months old. This ad is not its debut. And that's been, I think, a little polarizing. Like, I've seen people point to this ad and basically say that, does this mean our culture's obsession with thinness has progressed to the point that even a world-class athlete is under sort of societal pressure to lose weight, which I think is not an illegitimate claim to make, but maybe is a little unfair to Serena, who obviously is an adult with agency and chose to do this. And in interviews, she said basically she had kids and she was less than pleased with her metabolic health after, and decided to take a GLP-1 medicine in addition to other lifestyle changes to kind of get back to where she wanted to be. Reasonable enough. It's also worth noting that her husband is an investor in and board member of Ro. So that's a disclosure the company makes. Figured I'd make it too. But yeah, it's fascinating from a regulatory point of view because Ro dispenses GLP-1 products, including Wegovy and Zepbound, but it's not Lilly and Novo. And this ad does not say the words Wegovy or Zepbound. So thus we don't have the voiceover saying you may experience nausea, vomiting, rare cases of etc. We just have Serena Williams, who we know and probably have a favorable opinion of as an audience, telling us that, yes, she too took a GLP-1 medicine. We watch her inject it. She tells us about how Ro has helped her get her life back on track, et cetera, et cetera. And we get an altogether more positive, I would say, view of the effects of these drugs than we might get from the equivalent ad from Lilly or Novo, who would be required to inform us of the various risks that are on the drugs' labels.
So what is the distinction between the the branded, albeit not named out loud, but the branded copyrighted Eli Lilly and Novo products that Ro is advertising versus the compounded products that Hims and Hers offer?
So yeah, it's interesting. The tell with the Ro ad is they call them FDA-approved GLP-1 medicines. And so the difference is compounded medicines, they don't go through the FDA approval process. The only reason that they're available, basically, is because at one point, the branded drugs were in a shortage, and the law allows for compounders, which are companies that basically produce a generic version of a drug that hasn't yet lost its patent protection. They were legally allowed to sell them during that shortage. Now, that shortage has since elapsed, but there are legacy compounded products, we could call them, available from Hims and other places that kind of skirt the middle ground of the law, which allows for the use of compounding if somebody has a prescription, for example, for a dosage that isn't commercially available. And a doctor specifically says this patient needs, 3 milligrams a week instead of the available 2. That allows you to write a compounded prescription for it. Now, if you ask Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, who are suing Hims and other companies, they would say, look, they're just finding a way around our patent protection in order to preserve their business. Hims and Hers would say, no, we provide a customized product that physicians want for their patients, and this is all above board. This is a matter being fought out in the courts, and as I mentioned before, is deeply aggravating to the Eli Lillys and Novo Nordisk of the world.
They're doing these things that are kind of skirting regulations, but they couldn't be doing it on a bigger stage than the Super Bowl. And even though they're kind of doing what they can to dodge these rules, why do you think that companies have gotten so brazen about this?
It's interesting. I mean, I think, one, there's just money to be made. But to your point, the Super Bowl of it all does play a factor in these stories. So Hims, this has been their business for many years. Last year's Super Bowl ad, which attracted, one, a lot of attention, but a lot of negative attention to Hims, had, I think, a knock-on effect in the public perception of this company. It led to pharmaceutical companies kind of being more full-throated in their criticisms of Hims. And so I think it's a combination of, one, these are for-profit businesses. A Super Bowl ad is a great way to, get through to the median American. But two, they want a seat at the table. They want to be part of the conversation. The phrase GLP-1 advertises itself. Everybody knows what it is. So if you're one of these firms and you can attach your brand name to that thing that everybody knows what it is and maybe has a desire to try a GLP-1 themselves, as polling reveals a great many people do, I mean, there's just too much money to be made here, I think, for them to sit on the sidelines, despite the millions of dollars it costs to get an ad on the Super Bowl.
All right, Damian, that was really interesting. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks again to Damian. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I find all this stuff about drug ads endlessly fascinating, but as a Patriots fan, I can't tell you what it means to finally be back in the Super Bowl. We haven't been in the Super Bowl this decade. Their last appearance was 2019. I mean, I probably had to adjust the rabbit ear antenna on my TV to get a good signal way back then. This is probably a bad time to ask people to like and subscribe. But if you enjoyed this video, it's a little click, but it helps us out a lot. And we'll be back next week. Same stat time, same stat channel. Go Pats.